Welcome, folks, to the Points to Ponder podcast. This is your host, Mike. We have so much going on currently in America with COVID-19, the election, the economy. There's so much uncertainty in the air. When I promised to do this podcast, I planned on covering topics that affected all of us. However, due to recent events, I have decided to do a special podcast for the election on November 3rd, which is next week. We have so much to cover today, and I will do my best to stay on track. So my opening point to ponder. To which previous year in world history would you compare 2022? It's a great question. And this has been on my mind for, I would say, for a little over a month. So to get started, a month ago, I approached a history teacher and asked him the same question. After a few days, he responded with 1968, when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And just to give you an opening quote here that covers what we're talking about, this quote is from Thomas Sagru from the National Geographic. He has an article out there, and I'll post it here when I am finished. But his quote was, in April 1968, sorrow and fury over Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination turned to uprisings in which more than 100 cities were burned. In comparison to this year, we have had protests in hundreds of cities, with the people participating being of different racial backgrounds. Not just black or brown. I mean, there's a black, brown, and white. The protests are not simply about the inequality for one race of people, and this is my opinion. These protests are about the inequality for all people. The protests this year were deeper. I mean, we matter. And there are some images that I will attach to this podcast from the New York Times and also from Politico that cover the protesters in over 100 cities being tear gassed. Okay, so the history teacher said 1968, which is a good approximation in my opinion, but it's well off my personal mark of what I had in my mind, and I'll get to that here in a second. All right, so we talked about the racial inequality and racial conflict that's been happening this year. So let's talk about the voter suppression that's currently happening, and this affects all races. All right, it affects all income levels. So there was an article that caught my eye by the Washington Post back in late September, and it was by Amy Gardner and Josh Dawsey. The title is Early Surge of Democratic Mail Voting Sparks Worry Inside GOP. And just to take one of their quotes here, of the more than 9 million voters who requested mail ballots through Monday in Florida, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Maine, and Iowa, the 5 battleground states where such data is publicly available, 52% were Democrats, 28% were Republicans, and 20% were unaffiliated. Additional internal Democratic and Republican Party data obtained by the Washington Post shows a similar trend in Ohio, Minnesota, New Hampshire, and Wisconsin. So this caught my attention. I set it aside. I kind of filed it away mentally. And then there was this article yesterday that I spotted on CBS News. The title is The Supreme Court Quashes Wisconsin Court Order that said absentee ballots could be counted up to 6 days after Election Day. And this was done by Jan Crawford and Adam Brewster as of yesterday, October 27th. And this really sparked some deep disgust as just one more straw, right? The straw that breaks the camel's back of what we've been going through this entire year, the divisions, the uncertainty, and now they're taking away people's right to vote, suppressing people's right to vote. And this is coming down to party lines in the U.S. Supreme Court. It's not even a mixed bag. And it's like I said, it's it's distressing. It should be to everyone that people are not going to be allowed to take ownership, to be involved in the political process, to help change it for the better. And this leads me to my last point here, and to basically answer my previous point to ponder. And that is, so what year, right? So what year would you compare 2022 in world history? And I have to say it's 1787, which is the year the French Revolution started. And I'm not the only one who's suggesting this. And actually, the brilliant one is Rebecca Spang, who is a history teacher or history professor, sorry, at Indiana University. And she has an article in The Atlantic that was dated on April 5th. And I love her introduction here. I have to quote this. Fear sweeps the land. Many businesses collapse. Some huge fortunes are made. Panicked consumers stockpile paper, food, and weapons. The government's reaction is inconsistent and ineffectual. Ordinary commerce grinds to a halt. Investors can find no safe assets. Political factionalism grows more intense. Everything falls apart. She goes on to say, this was all as true of revolutionary France in 1789 and 1790 as it is of the United States today. Are we at the beginning of a revolution that has yet to be named? End quote. It's fascinating. It really is, the parallels. And I'm just going to briefly go through this. This is not intended to be a lecture on history by any means, and I'm not going to bombard people with piles and piles of stats and quotes. So there were several reasons for the French Revolution, and I'll give you a top three here. So the French had, during that period, had increasing taxes, debt, and poverty levels, which altogether were creating too much of a burden on the people, and then the people in turn were not having their needs met at all. The French also had some major crop failures at that time, which led to starvation. And the French had increasing class division and lack of representation. So the parallels are there. I mean, you look at the parallels between the French Revolution and our current society: housing inflation, declining middle class wages, unsustainable economic system that can't operate without government intervention. We have voter suppression, a healthcare system that is sucking disposable income year after year from the middle class and elderly in this nation. We have a crazy cost to the access to education, and throughout it all, we have rising levels of anxiety and depression from feeling smothered and with no way out. Not to mention the main indicator, which we've talked about last week, which is declining levels of empathy. So I leave here today, folks. Thank you for your time, but I'll leave you with this point to ponder. Are you going to get out there and make sure that your vote is counted? It matters. We all matter. Take care, folks. This is Points to Ponder, and I am your host, Mike. I'll see you next time.